There comes a point when the stories we've been told about reality start to sound less like explanations and more like excuses. People grow up being told that the universe has a creator, that everything we see is part of a divine plan, and that meaning itself flows from some invisible being watching over it all. But when you start to look closer and when you actually question those ideas instead of repeating them, the foundation starts to shake and the cracks become hard to ignore. Let's start with something simple, the idea of evidence. In any other part of life, we rely on evidence to decide what's true. If someone tells you your car's on fire, you go check. If someone claims they can cure disease with a crystal, you ask for proof. But when it comes to God, people often make an exception. They suspend the same standards of logic they use for everything else. They call it faith. Yet faith, by definition, means believing without evidence. And that's where the first reason to doubt begins. Because if the existence of a God was as real as people claim, why would faith even be necessary? You don't need faith to believe in gravity or atoms or electricity. We can measure those things, observe them, and see their effects directly. The more you study reality, the less room there is for just believe. That phrase only appears when the evidence doesn't hold up. The universe itself gives us reasons to question the need for a creator. For most of human history, people used God to explain what they didn't understand. Thunder was divine anger, disease was punishment, and the stars were lanterns in the sky. But as science advanced, those mysteries started shrinking, and we found natural explanations for almost everything once thought to be supernatural. And every time that happened, God quietly stepped back. This pattern, it's sometimes called the God of the gaps, and keeps repeating. When we don't know how something works, we insert God. But as knowledge grows, those gaps close. If the idea of God only survives in the spaces where we're ignorant, then it's not a truth. It's a placeholder, a shrinking one. Then there's the problem of scale. When religious texts were written, people thought the earth was the center of everything. They believed humanity was the focus of creation. But we now know we're living on a small rock orbiting a medium-sized star in one of hundreds of billions of galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars. If there is a God, why would it design such a vast, cold, and different universe only to focus all its attention on one species on one planet? That alone raises a question of proportion. The universe doesn't look designed for humans. It looks like humans happen to appear in a universe that doesn't care one way or another. Most of it is empty, hostile to life, and lethal to human existence. Calling that fine-tuning feels more like wishful thinking than observation. So now consider moralities. One of the most common arguments for God's existence. Many people say you need God for morality to exist, that without a divine lawgiver, there can be no right or wrong. But that's not how morality works in reality. Human beings had moral instincts long before organized religion. Cooperation, empathy, and fairness evolved because they helped societies survive. You don't need a sacred book to tell you that killing your neighbor is wrong. Your conscience and empathy do that naturally. And if morality really depended on religion, the world's most religious nations would be the most ethical. But statistically, they're not. The rates of corruption, violence, and inequality are often higher in deeply religious societies than in secular ones. Meanwhile, countries with less belief in God tend to have higher standards of living, better education, and stronger protections for human rights. That doesn't prove morality comes from atheism, but it does suggest it doesn't require religion. Another reason to doubt comes from the sheer diversity of belief itself. Every religion claims to have the truth, yet there are thousands of them, each contradicting the others. If one were truly correct, the odds of being born into it should matter less. But statistically, your religion depends almost entirely on where you were born. Geography decides belief far more than divine revelation ever has. That fact alone should make anyone pause, because if the evidence for God were universal and clear, people everywhere would reach the same conclusion. They don't. Instead, each culture creates its own version of a higher power, gods that look and think like their followers. That pattern suggests projection, not revelation. Humans creating gods in their own image, not the other way around. And then there's suffering. The world is full of unnecessary pain, not just human pain, but animal suffering on a massive scale. Millions of years of creatures eating each other alive before humans even existed. If there's a God who designed this system, it chose a method of creation soaked in blood and extinction. That's not a test. That's nature doing what it does. Indifferent, random, and sometimes cruel. The problem of evil isn't just philosophical, it's biological. Religious explanations for suffering usually fall into one of three camps. It's punishment, it's a test, or it's mysterious. But none of those hold up under scrutiny. A God who punishes the innocent for other sins isn't just. A God who tests people with disease, disaster, and loss sounds insecure, not loving. And mysterious ways is just a polite way of saying, we don't know. It stops inquiry where it should begin. The human mind itself gives us more reasons to doubt. Psychologists have shown how easily our brains detect patterns and assign agency, even when none exists. It's an evolved survival trait. Our ancestors survived by assuming rustling grass meant a predator, not the wind. That instinct to see purpose where there's only chance may explain why gods appeared in the first place. We're meaning-making machines living in a meaningless universe, constantly trying to find order where there's none. And religions take advantage of that tendency. They offer comforting answers to deep fears, fear of death, fear of randomness, fear of insignificance. They promise that everything happens for a reason, that someone is watching, judging, guiding. Those ideas feel good, but feeling good isn't the same as being true. History also gives us reasons to doubt. Every era has seen people convinced that their God is the one true God, right up until their beliefs were replaced, reinterpreted, or abandoned. The gods of ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome once inspired temples, rituals, and moral codes, and now they're myths. The pattern repeats across cultures. The only difference between a dead religion and a living one is time. When you realize that, you start to see belief not as revelation, but as evolution or a cultural adaptation, a way for humans to create order and meaning in chaos. Once that function is understood, the supernatural claim behind it becomes unnecessary. We can explain religion without invoking gods at all. And the more we understand the universe, from the cosmic scale to the microscopic, the less space there is for the supernatural to hide. Lightning, disease, earthquakes, consciousness, all things once attributed to divine power, now explained through natural processes. What remains of God is what we haven't yet explained, but history suggests that as long as human curiosity keeps going, that gap will keep shrinking. Even prayer, often seen as proof of God's presence, raises questions. Controlled studies on prayer's effectiveness show no measurable impact when variables are isolated. When people pray and things work out, they see it as evidence of divine intervention. When they don't, it's called God's plan. Either way, the result is interpreted to fit the belief. That's not evidence. It's confirmation bias. Faith thrives on selective memory. People remember the coincidences that align with belief and forget the ones that don't. The mind filters experience through expectation. That's how superstition survives. You can prove this in small ways. Toss a coin, ask a question, and see how easily the human brain connects random outcomes to meaning. It's not divine. It's psychological. And that psychology, multiplied across billions of people, shapes entire civilizations. Religious belief spreads through culture, upbringing, and repetition, not through direct evidence. Children believe what they're told because authority and comfort come from those teachings. By adulthood, belief feels like knowledge. Even when it's not, it's important to recognize that doubt isn't arrogance, it's honesty. It's saying, I don't know, instead of pretending certainty where none exists. The unknown doesn't require a divine placeholder. It just means there's more to learn. And in many ways, that's a more humbling and awe-inspiring perspective than believing the universe was built for us. Doubt isn't the opposite of faith. It's the beginning of understanding, because once you allow yourself to question, you realize how little the concept of God explains and how much more interesting reality becomes when you let go of the idea that it needs to be ruled by an invisible mind. For many people, the first crack in belief comes not from science but from experience. They pray and nothing changes. They live morally and still suffer. They watch terrible people prosper and good people fall apart. Over time, the idea of an all-powerful, benevolent God becomes harder to defend against reality itself. If there's a plan, it's indistinguishable from chaos. People often say that God works in mysterious ways, but that phrase is a shield against evidence. It allows any outcome to fit the theory. If something good happens, it's divine love. If something terrible happens, it's divine testing. The logic is circular. It explains everything and therefore explains nothing. Real explanations can be tested, falsified, and improved. Theological ones can't, because they're designed to survive contradiction. And when you look at the world through that lens, you start to see how much of religion relies on human storytelling. We pass down myths to explain what we don't understand. Every culture does this. But over time, myths harden into dogma. They stop being stories and start being truth. The moment that happens, questioning becomes a threat instead of a curiosity, and that's how ideas outlive their evidence. Take creation stories, for instance. Nearly every religion has one, and they all describe the universe as a deliberate act by a conscious being. But we now know that stars, planets, and galaxies form naturally from the laws of physics. There's no sign of supervision. The universe operates through processes that don't require oversight. Gravity, nuclear fusion, entropy, none of them depend on intention. They just happen. And yet, despite this, belief persists. Partly because belief is emotionally rewarding. Humans crave certainty and meaning. Randomness feels unbearable. So when someone says everything happens for a reason, it soothes the mind. It turns pain into purpose. The idea that life's events, even tragedies, are part of a grand design gives people comfort. But comfort and truth are not the same thing. And that's one of the toughest realizations, because doubt doesn't offer the same emotional protection. It doesn't promise that loss means something or that death leads somewhere. It just tells you what's real. And reality, stripped of comforting illusions, can feel cold at first. But in the long run, it's a more stable foundation. Belief built on false certainty always collapses under pressure. You can see this in religious contradictions. Sacred texts often claim to be perfect, yet they contain clear inconsistencies, moral double standards, and outdated worldviews. They reflect the time and place they were written, not divine insight, but human culture. The gods within them share human flaws: anger, jealousy, bias, cruelty. It makes far more sense to see them as projections of human psychology than as the creators of the universe. And if you look closer, the evolution of religion mirrors the evolution of human society. As our understanding of morality improved, so did our image of God. Ancient gods demanded sacrifices. Later gods demanded obedience. Modern interpretations emphasize love and forgiveness. The being didn't change. Our expectations did. That's a powerful sign that we're the ones shaping the divine image, not the other way around. When you understand that, the question shifts. Instead of asking, does God exist? You start asking, why do we need God to exist? And that's a more revealing question, because most of what people credit to God, morality, purpose, comfort, community, can be explained without one. These are human creations born from our capacity for cooperation and empathy. There's also the matter of unanswered prayers and tragedies that no amount of faith can justify. Natural disasters wipe out entire towns. Diseases strike children. Innocent lives end randomly every day. If this universe is the product of a loving, conscious designer, it's one that tolerates staggering levels of cruelty and waste. The usual defense is free will, but that doesn't explain earthquakes, viruses, or genetic disorders. Those have nothing to do with choice. They're simply what happens in a universe governed by natural laws, not moral intent. It's far more consistent to view the universe as indifferent rather than moral. Nature doesn't punish or reward. It just reacts. You can live a perfect life and still suffer, or you can do everything wrong and still thrive. If there's a pattern, it's probabilistic, not personal. The universe operates on chance and consequence, not justice. That may not feel comforting, but it fits the evidence. Now think about how religion treats doubt itself. In many traditions, questioning is labeled as sin or rebellion. People are told that disbelief leads to damnation. That warning alone tells you something. Truth doesn't need protection through fear. Only fragile ideas do. If an all-powerful God truly existed, it wouldn't need humans to defend its reputation. It wouldn't fear skepticism. It would be self-evident. Instead, doubt is treated as dangerous because it breaks the cycle of control. When people begin to ask honest questions, power structures weaken. That's why religious authorities throughout history have tried to suppress critical thought through censorship, punishment, or social pressure, not because they fear losing faith in God, but because they fear losing authority. You can see this throughout history. Whenever knowledge expanded, during the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, or the rise of scientific reasoning, religion lost ground, not because science set out to destroy it, but because truth replaced superstition naturally. When you show that lightning comes from electricity instead of divine wrath, belief doesn't die overnight. It just becomes a necessary, and necessity is the key. Religion thrives where uncertainty reigns. When life feels unpredictable, when people feel powerless, belief offers stability. It fills the gaps of understanding and gives a sense of order. But in a world where information is accessible, those gaps are closing faster than ever. And that's why doubt is growing, not as rebellion, but as recognition. Even at the personal level, people start doubting not out of pride, but out of curiosity. They want answers that make sense. They notice contradictions in scripture, moral inconsistencies, or unanswered prayers. And instead of silencing that discomfort, they follow it. And often what they find is that the absence of God doesn't create emptiness. It creates clarity. Because when you stop expecting cosmic justice, you start creating your own. When you stop believing that meaning comes from above, you start building it from within. And that shift, from imposed belief to self-discovered understanding, is the essence of intellectual freedom. One of the most interesting things about belief is how deeply it's wired into the human brain. Neuroscience shows that the same regions responsible for pattern recognition and social intuition, the ability to read other minds and intentions, are active when people think about gods. In other words, belief in invisible agents isn't supernatural at all. It's neurological. Our ancestors evolved to see intention everywhere because it increased their odds of survival. If you assumed that a sound in the dark was a predator, you stayed alive. Over thousands of generations, that hyperactive agency detection became part of our mental framework. And when we applied it to the unknown, thunder, disease, death, gods naturally emerged. It wasn't revelation, it was cognition. This instinct still shapes us today. People often say, everything happens for a reason. But randomness makes us uncomfortable. So our minds invent connections that aren't there. We attribute coincidences to fate, intuition, or divine guidance. But when you step back, you can see it's just the brain trying to create a narrative out of chaos. It's what the mind does best, tell stories. And religion at its core is the biggest story ever told. It gives structure to uncertainty. It gives the illusion that someone's in control, that there's purpose behind pain, and that death isn't really the end. Those are powerful psychological comforts, but they also show how belief can emerge naturally from human needs, not divine truth. When you look closely, God starts to look less like a creator and more like a reflection of our own hopes and fears. Psychologists call this anthropomorphism, the tendency to project human qualities onto non-human things. We give storms emotions, we talk to our cars, we curse at computers. It's the same impulse that made early humans imagine spirits in the trees and the sky. Once you realize that, it becomes clear that the gods people worship are, in a way, mirrors. They reflect what we value, what we fear, and what we wish for. There's also a social side to belief. Humans are tribal creatures. Shared stories bond groups together. Religion offered not only moral guidance, but social cohesion. It created community, order, and identity. But the flip side is that it also created division, us versus them. Belief becomes not just about truth, but belonging. People defend their faith fiercely because losing it can feel like losing their entire social world. That's why debates about God often feel emotional rather than rational. It's not just an idea being questioned, it's identity, family, tradition, even self-worth. The belief system becomes part of the believer. So when someone questions it, it feels like an attack. That's also why religious belief tends to resist evidence. It's not held by logic, it's held by attachment. And yet, even with all that, doubt keeps growing because attachment can't survive forever against reality. As people are exposed to different ideas, worldviews, and data, the contradictions become too obvious to ignore. Religion depends on isolation, keeping followers inside the same circle of thought. The internet shattered that circle. Now anyone, anywhere, can compare doctrines, study contradictions, and question everything. And that transparency has done more to erode blind faith than any argument ever could. But doubt doesn't have to be cold or cynical. It can be deeply compassionate because doubt asks for honesty, not only about the world, but about ourselves. It asks whether our beliefs make sense, whether they align with evidence, whether they cause harm. Many people cling to God because they believe morality depends on it. But in reality, morality often improves when divine authority is removed. When we stop believing that suffering is part of a plan, we start actually trying to reduce it. That's what happens when responsibility replaces superstition. Instead of waiting for divine justice, people demand human justice. Instead of praying for the sick, they fund hospitals. Instead of asking for miracles, they develop medicine. Doubt doesn't destroy compassion, it strengthens it because it puts the burden of care on us. And that's a far more meaningful form of morality than obedience to invisible rules. Think of how many breakthroughs came from questioning religious assumptions. Astronomy, biology, medicine, psychology. All of these fields advanced by challenging the idea that everything was divinely orchestrated. When scientists stopped assuming humans were created in their final form, we discovered evolution. When we stopped assuming illness was punishment, we developed germ theory. Doubt built modern civilization, and yet religion still claims moral authority. It still insists that without God, everything is meaningless. But the claim falls apart when you look at how people actually live. Meaning isn't given, it's made. People find purpose in love, art, curiosity, and connection. None of that requires divine permission. In fact, it becomes even more profound when you realize it's temporary. Beauty means more because it doesn't last forever. That's something believers rarely admit. That mortality gives life urgency. If eternity were guaranteed, nothing would matter as much. But when you know this is the only life you get, every moment becomes sacred in its own way. The sunset, the laughter, the silence, they're not gifts from heaven. They're fragments of experience that exist because the universe accidentally allowed them. And somehow that makes them even more precious. There's a quiet power in accepting that. You don't need the universe to care about you to care about it. You don't need cosmic purpose to create personal purpose. The absence of a God doesn't mean emptiness, it means freedom. It means you can define meaning for yourself without fear of punishment or reward from beyond. That's not nihilism, that's liberation. And maybe that's the real reason people fear doubt. Because once you realize you don't need a God to live a moral, meaningful, fulfilled life, the entire structure of control collapses. No priest, no scripture, no divine law can claim authority over your mind. You become accountable only to truth and empathy, and that's something far more powerful than faith could ever be. When you start to trace religion through history, a pattern emerges. Belief has always been intertwined with power. From ancient kingdoms to modern politics, gods have been used to justify authority. Kings claimed divine right, priests claimed to speak for the heavens, and ordinary people were told that obedience wasn't just a civic duty, it was a spiritual one. This wasn't accidental. Religion became a tool to shape behavior, maintain order, and control populations. It offered a way to unify people under a single belief system, but it also made questioning that system dangerous. If doubt equaled disobedience, then the powerful could rule without resistance. You weren't just defying human law, you were defying the divine. That's how belief became one of the most effective social technologies ever created. Even today, you can see the remnants of that. Political leaders invoking God to justify wars, laws influenced by ancient scripture instead of modern ethics, public figures claiming divine guidance to validate their personal agendas. When religion and power mix, the result is rarely compassion, it's control, and history proves that again and again. During the Middle Ages, the church dictated what people could read, say, or even think. Questioning official doctrine could mean death. Knowledge was dangerous because it empowered individuals to think for themselves, something faith-based systems often fear. The more independent the mind, the less useful faith becomes as a leash. The irony is that many of the same institutions that once suppressed learning later claimed credit for preserving it. But what they really preserved was obedience. They taught people how to repeat, not how to reason. And even now, that legacy lingers. In some parts of the world, religious dogma still shapes education, silencing science whenever it conflicts with scripture. Children grow up memorizing holy texts instead of understanding the universe they live in. That's why doubt isn't just an intellectual act, it's a moral one. It's refusing to let inherited ideas define the limits of your thought. It's asking whether ancient beliefs written by people who thought the earth was flat should still decide how we treat others today. Because if those texts were truly divine, why do they mirror the prejudices of their time so perfectly? Why do they reflect the social hierarchies, the gender roles, the moral blind spots of the humans who wrote them? The answer is simple: because they are human. Every holy text carries the fingerprints of the culture that produced it. The gods within them endorse the same biases their followers held, and that's exactly what you'd expect from human invention. When people claim divine command for their values, what they're really doing is giving their own opinions sacred armor. It turns personal belief into unquestionable truth, and that's dangerous. Throughout history, that danger has cost lives. Wars fought in God's name, genocides justified by divine will, slavery defended through scripture, women denied education, rights, and autonomy because God said so. If there's a being behind these commandments, it behaves more like a projection of human cruelty than an all-knowing moral guide. But if these ideas came from people, the cruelty makes perfect sense. Humans wrote gods in their own image and gave their flaws cosmic power. Still, belief persists because it adapts. As society evolves, religion evolves with it, always adjusting just enough to survive. When slavery became indefensible, believers reinterpreted the verses that once supported it. When science revealed the age of the earth, creation stories became metaphors. When moral progress exposed outdated doctrines, faith called it modern understanding. The beliefs shift, but the structure stays. It's not about truth, it's about survival. And yet, that flexibility exposes the weakness of divine authority. If moral truth truly came from God, it wouldn't need constant revision to match modern values. The fact that it does suggests that morality progresses independently of religion, often in spite of it. People grow more ethical not because they rediscover scripture, but because they outgrow it. They recognize harm, empathy, and justice as human concerns, not divine decrees. Think about issues like LGBTQ+ rights, gender equality, or freedom of speech. Religion opposed these movements for centuries, labeling them sinful or unnatural. But over time, society moved forward anyway. Compassion, reason, and shared humanity won out over doctrine, and now religions scramble to reinterpret themselves, pretending they were on the side of progress all along. That's not revelation, that's adaptation under pressure. Another subtle but powerful reason to doubt God's existence is the diversity of belief itself. If there truly were one all-knowing, all-powerful being who wanted everyone to know the truth, why is that truth so unclear? Why does every culture invent a different God, each convinced theirs is the only one? The contradiction is staggering. Billions of people praying to different versions of the same idea, all convinced they're right, and all dismissing everyone else as misguided. When you step back, it looks exactly like what you'd expect from human psychology, not divine communication. People inherit beliefs from parents, not from gods. They interpret the world through culture, not revelation, and the emotional intensity of belief, that feeling of absolute certainty, doesn't make it true. It just shows how powerful conviction can be, even without evidence. The diversity of religion isn't proof of divine creativity. It's proof of human imagination. It's cultural storytelling multiplied across millennia. Each god, each sacred story is a window into what people feared and hoped for at the time. And when you recognize that, the divine becomes less mysterious and more familiar. None of this means spirituality has no place in human life. Wonder, awe, gratitude, those feelings are real, but they don't require a deity. You can stand beneath the night sky and feel humbled without believing someone painted it for you. You can feel connected to others without thinking the connection is cosmic. The beauty of existence doesn't need a creator to be meaningful. It just is. And maybe that's the hardest truth of all, that the universe doesn't revolve around us. It doesn't care, and yet we care deeply. That in itself is extraordinary. Consciousness, compassion, creativity, they're the rarest phenomena we know of. The fact that they exist at all, in a universe that doesn't guarantee them, is far more miraculous than any ancient myth. When people first let go of belief in God, there's often a moment of quiet fear, a feeling of loss, as if the universe suddenly became colder, emptier. That's understandable. For most of human history, people were told that God was the source of everything good, love, morality, meaning, even existence itself. So when that idea fades, it can feel like the world loses its center, but then something unexpected happens. That silence where God used to be, it doesn't stay empty. It fills with reality, with truth, with curiosity, with connection. You start to see meaning not as something given to you, but as something you build. You start to value your own consciousness, your relationships, your small role in the vastness of time and space. And slowly, you realize that meaning created by humans, fragile, fleeting, imperfect, is more powerful than meaning dictated by unseen authority. Because meaning you make yourself can't be taken away. It's not conditional. It doesn't depend on obedience or faith. It grows from experience, from compassion, from the shared moments that make being human worthwhile. You don't need eternity for that to matter. You just need awareness. And that awareness, that ability to reflect, to question, to wonder, is what makes life sacred in its own way. Not because a deity blessed it, but because it exists at all. Out of all the possible ways atoms could have arranged themselves, they arranged themselves into you. Consciousness emerging from chaos, that's awe-inspiring, and it's real. When people say that without God, life has no purpose, they're confusing purpose with prescription. They want life to come with instructions, with a built-in reason for existing, but that's not what purpose is. Purpose isn't found, it's chosen. The universe doesn't owe you one. And yet, that's what makes it beautiful. You get to decide it yourself. You can dedicate your life to learning, creating, helping, or loving. You can choose to make the world a little better before you leave it. And that choice means more precisely because it's yours. When you're no longer living under divine surveillance, morality also becomes more genuine. You do good not because you're being watched, but because you understand that others feel pain like you do. Empathy replaces commandment. You realize that kindness has value not because it earns eternal reward, but because it reduces suffering now. That's not moral relativism, and it's moral maturity. And it's here that doubt reveals its true strength. It doesn't destroy meaning. It rebuilds it on solid ground. It replaces borrowed certainty with honest curiosity. It removes the illusion of cosmic justice and replaces it with real human accountability. It asks you to care, not because you'll be punished if you don't, but because it's the right thing to do. If anything, doubt demands more of us than belief ever did. Belief allows surrender. Doubt requires responsibility. When you believe a higher power controls everything, you can justify inaction. When you doubt that, the burden shifts. The responsibility for this world, for its problems, its injustices, its beauty, falls on us. And strangely enough, that makes life more meaningful, not less. Think about it. When someone gives you a gift, it's valuable. But when you build something yourself, when you earn it, shape it, struggle for it, it means infinitely more. Meaning built through effort is stronger than meaning handed down. That's what happens when you stop expecting the universe to care. You begin to care on your own, and in that caring, you find something deeper than faith: connection. Not with an invisible being, but with everything real and alive around you. The people you love, the strangers you help, the planet that sustains you. That connection doesn't need to be eternal to be sacred. It's sacred because it's here, now. It's a humbling realization. You're not the center of the universe, but you're part of it, a conscious observer in a vast, indifferent cosmos. You came from stardust, and one day you'll return to it. But in between those moments of oblivion, you get to feel, to think, to act, to love. That's not meaningless. That's miraculous in his own right. Not the kind written in holy books, but the kind that unfolds quietly every second. The strange thing about doubt is that once you embrace it, it stops feeling like loss. It feels like honesty. It feels like taking off a mask you didn't realize you were wearing. You don't need to fill every unknown with God anymore. You can let mystery be mystery. You can live with questions, because questions are where discovery begins. And that shift, and from fear of not knowing to wonder in not knowing, that's what makes life richer. The universe doesn't have to have a plan for you to find beauty in it. The night sky doesn't need to be a message for it to move you. Existence doesn't have to be designed for it to be worth living. It's enough that it exists at all. Every generation gets closer to understanding that. The more we learn, the more the old myths lose their power, but what replaces them isn't emptiness, it's perspective. The understanding that morality, beauty, and meaning don't need to be given from above to exist. They emerge naturally from minds capable of love, awareness, and choice. And maybe that's what humanity has been searching for all along, not a God to rule over us, but the courage to live without one, the realization that truth doesn't need to be comforting to be profound, that goodness doesn't need reward to be real, that life doesn't need eternity to be worth living. So when someone asks, what's the point without God? The answer is simple. The point is to live, to learn, to connect, to care, to leave the world a little better than you found it. Not because someone told you to, but because you can, because in a universe vast beyond comprehension, filled mostly with silence and emptiness, the fact that you're here at all, was thinking, breathing, loving, is enough reason to be in awe. You don't need more than that. There's a quiet beauty in realizing that you don't have all the answers, and that you don't need them to live fully. For most of human history, people have built stories to make sense of the unknown. They looked up at the stars and saw gods, heroes, and destinies. It was comforting to believe there was intention behind every sunrise, every storm, every heartbeat. But the truth is, the universe doesn't speak in intentions. It simply is. And yet, that doesn't make it empty. It makes it honest. The universe doesn't promise fairness, but it gives you the ability to create it. It doesn't guarantee meaning, but it gives you the freedom to define it. It doesn't assure love, but it gives you the capacity to feel it. In that sense, everything people once attributed to God has always been within us. The power to shape, to wonder, to care. None of that disappears when belief does. It just changes direction from upward to outward. When you stop seeing life as a test or a prelude to eternity, something profound happens. You start living for the moment, not the afterlife. You start caring about this planet, this time, these people. You realize that heaven isn't something to wait for, it's something to build, right here, right now, through kindness, through understanding, through love. That's not a loss of faith. That's a shift in focus. The sacred moves from the supernatural to the natural, from promises of another world to the fragile beauty of this one. And when you see it that way, even the smallest things, a shared laugh, the sound of rain, the warmth of sunlight, feel infinite in their own way. You don't need eternity when the present moment is this vivid. Many people fear that letting go of God means losing wonder. But in reality, it's the opposite. When you no longer have ready-made answers, everything becomes more mysterious, more fascinating. The question, why does the universe exist, becomes more profound when you realize there might not be a reason. Just existence itself, raw and unfiltered. That's not disappointing. That's astonishing because it means you're part of something vast and ancient and improbable. You are not outside of creation. You are creation. Conscious matter observing itself. The atoms in your body were forged in stars that lived and died billions of years ago. Every breath you take connects you to everything that has ever lived. That's not divine magic. That's reality. And it's more beautiful than any myth. Doubt doesn't destroy awe, it deepens it. It replaces blind reverence with understanding. It shifts you from worshiping mystery to exploring it. And in doing so, it gives you a different kind of faith, not in gods, but in curiosity, in truth, in the human capacity to grow. When you think about it, every major step humanity has taken came from doubt. Someone doubted the earth was flat. Someone doubted disease was caused by sin. Someone doubted the stars revolved around us. Doubt isn't weakness, it's progress. It's the force that pulls us forward, that frees us from inherited illusions. Every question that challenges belief opens the door to a deeper, more grounded understanding of reality. And maybe that's what makes humanity unique, is we're not satisfied with simple answers. We want to know why. That's the spark that separates superstition from science, dogma from discovery. When you stop fearing doubt, you start thinking clearly. You start to see that truth doesn't need protection. Only lies do. Truth can stand on its own. It doesn't need worship. It just needs honesty. And honesty leads to something even greater, humility. The realization that we don't have all the answers, that we're still learning, still evolving, that humility is the beginning of wisdom. Religion often confuses humility with submission, but true humility isn't bowing to invisible authority. It's recognizing your place in a vast, indifferent universe and still choosing to care. That choice to care without being commanded, to love without promise of reward, to seek truth without fear of what it reveals, that's the purest expression of what it means to be human. You don't need divine permission for compassion. You don't need scripture to know that suffering matters. You don't need a God to see that kindness is sacred. When belief fades, responsibility replaces it. The fate of the world is in our hands, not a deity's. That's both terrifying and empowering because it means we are the authors of our own future. If we want peace, justice, and understanding, we can't pray them into existence. We have to build them together. And in doing so, we become the answer to our own prayers. Maybe that's what belief was trying to teach all along. Not that there's a higher power controlling us, but that we have the potential to be better than we are. That goodness doesn't come from fear of punishment, but from empathy. That meaning isn't given, it's made. That heaven isn't found, it's created through action, compassion, and understanding. So if you find yourself doubting, don't see it as rebellion. See it as awakening. Doubt isn't the end of belief. It's the beginning of clarity. It's the point where borrowed answers fall away and genuine understanding begins. And maybe, just maybe, the truest act of faith is trusting reality enough to face it as it is, without illusion, without fear, just truth, vast, uncertain, and endlessly fascinating. Because in the end, the most meaningful revelation isn't that there's a God watching over you, it's that you're capable of creating meaning without one. You are the consciousness of the cosmos, aware, curious, and fleeting, and that all by itself is enough.